This weekend, we have the opportunity to celebrate the great feast of the Epiphany, where Jesus is presented to the world through the eyes of the three magi, the three kings who visit him at the stable in Bethlehem. There are 3 points I'd like to make during this little reflection. First of all, the magi, represent the longing of every person for the transcendent God. That's why they journey to the star. Second, that it is only through their meeting of the religious leaders at the time that they know the direction in which they are to travel to see the Christ child. And then finally, the gifts they bring are very interesting. Of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, these 3 gifts have a lot to do with who Jesus is, and really has a lot to do with who we are as baptized Christians. So let's take a look at these 3 points. First, while God has created this beautiful world, and it is certainly a wonderful life that we have, deep inside of every human person, there is a space that is reserved only for the transcendent God. Try as we want, filling that space up with all sorts of created things, and they are good things, we still will remain frustrated because that place, that reservoir that is reserved for God can only be really at peace, as St. Augustine says, when that space, our person, our community, our world rests in God. The Magi know this. They are very bright people. They are stargazers of their time, astronomers, astrologers, very bright people who want to measure the heavens, measure the earth. In other words, they want to know this created world well, and they also hunger for the transcendent God who created this world. And that's why they travel in a discerning sort of way toward the star, because they have heard that the King of the universe, the King of creation, is now in a stable in Bethlehem. We are like those magi. We are bright people. We use all of our talents and our gifts. We discern well. We want to measure everything. All of those things are good, but there's still a craving inside of all of us for that transcendent God that is outside of time and space. Yes, who has created the world, but our hearts are really longing for that transcendent God. The second point, the Magi try as hard as they can, really don't know what direction to go into. And it's interesting that it is only after they talk to the Pharisees and the scribes, the religious leaders of the house of Israel, who point them in the right direction, that they actually find the Christ child. But isn't that the story of our lives as well? Bright as we are, determined as we are, we need to engage the leadership of the Judeo-Christian tradition, we who are the holders of divine revelation, so that we can point ourselves and also point to others in the direction of the Christ child. The house of Israel, long tradition of being God's representative, the light of the nations to the world. The house of Israel, who give us the great patriarchs like Noah and Abraham and Moses, and even the great kings like King David, and of course all the holy people of the New Testament, and of course all point to Christ. And so try as we want to be sort of generic spiritual people, we need to engage the religious traditions of the Judeo-Christian realm so that we actually know where to find the Christ child. Finally, the 3 gifts that the Magi give: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I asked my students last week, as we were warming up to this feast, what they would bring to a family who just recently had a child, and of course their initial response was diapers. because I'm sure, as many of you know, that little infants run through them very quickly. And so a very practical gift. I'm proud of my students that they would think that way. But isn't it interesting that the three magi bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh? Looking more closely into these gifts, we understand who Jesus is and who we are as baptized Christians. Gold, obviously a very precious metal, something that we give to one another to honor people. Gold is a sign of nobility, and we know that Christ, little as he is in that infant, in that stable, is the king of the Jews, and then, of course, the king of the world. And as we celebrate in the last Sunday of the liturgical year, he is the king of the universe, because he has conquered sin and death and opened the gates of the kingdom of heaven to all of us. And so it's right that the Magi would bring gold to this king, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. Second, frankincense. Some of my students knew that frankincense was incense. This is a sign, of course, of the priesthood. The priests are called to make things holy, sacred. I'm sure that you have seen on many special occasions an ordained minister incensing the book of the Gospels before the Gospel is read, or incensing the altar before the liturgy of the Eucharist is about to begin. Incense is a sign that we want to make something holy. We want to lift up our prayers like smoke to God. And the sweet smelling of that burning incense is very pleasant to us. You can imagine that Christ, of course, is going to be the high priest. He is the one who's going to make the world holy. He is the one who's going to lift all of us up to God the Father in a sort of a sweet, precious way. And so Christ is the high priest who, of course, is going to die on the cross and save the world. A world that was ugly now is graced. Beautiful. And then finally, myrrh. This, many of my students didn't know much about, but myrrh was, in other words, oil or anointing. And of course, now we use oil, salve to bind up wounds, to promote healing, to promote health. Even in the simplest examples, now that it's cold, and especially here in Salt Lake City, is very dry, we put lotion on our hands and on our skin to revitalize our health, our healing, our hands, our skin. Likewise, in the times of the Bible, they used oil all the time. We know that great story of the Good Samaritan bending down and helping that poor man that's beaten up on the side of the road. And what does he do? He puts oil and wine into his wounds and heals them up. Of course, myrrh given to Christ is a sign that Christ is the one that's going to bring healing to this fractured world through his suffering, death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven. So these three gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, seem odd in the beginning, but in reality, they tell us who Christ is. He is the king, priest, and prophet of healing. One last thought. When you think about your own baptism, now many of us have, were very little kids, infants, really, when we were baptized, but I'm sure all of you have gone to a sacrament of baptism. And within the rite itself, when the minister is baptizing the child, after that child comes out of the water, he anoints the top of the head. And in the rite itself of baptism, it says, and I'm paraphrasing, as Christ was anointed priest, prophet, and king, so may you be anointed priest, prophet, and king. It seems to me the concluding remark is this. The Magi, when they went to the stable in Bethlehem and brought their gifts, and they identified Christ as priest, prophet, and king, they left completely transformed. In fact, the gospel says they left by another way. That's the gospel story basically saying they have been completely changed inside and out, these magi. Likewise, we bring ourselves today to the stable in Bethlehem. We bring not gold, frankincense, and myrrh, although we recognize Christ as priest, prophet, and king. We bring ourselves. And through our baptism, we allow the Lord to anoint us as witnesses in this world, as priests, prophets, and kings. Whether you're male or female, young or old, poor or rich, doesn't matter where you come from. In baptism, you are a priest, you are a prophet, and you are a king. As we journey with the Magi to this wonderful experience of meeting Christ in the stable next to Mary and Joseph, may we recognize in giving ourselves to Christ what he gives us, our true identity. God bless you today.